And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Bernie Steinberg to introduce Ms. Goldstein. Dr. Steinberg is the executive director at Harvard Hillel, and we're very grateful to him for helping to organize tonight's event. So please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
I'm going to be very brief. I don't think Rebecca Goldstein needs much of an introduction to an audience like this. Rebecca has been a hero of mine from the beginning of your first publication of The Mind-Body Problem. I showed that to my daughter in high school. She then decided that she had to go to Columbia. She had to major in philosophy. She's been an atheist ever since. But but what really struck me about that book, and it informs this book as well, is that it crosses over and creates a conversation, a deep conversation between literature and philosophy, and the kind of conversation that really enhances both domains, if indeed you can call them domains. What it does as a literary book, among other things, is it teaches you how to see reality. And I just want to read one, maybe 3 lines from this book, which I think really capture that. René Descartes identified the seat of the soul as the pineal gland, but in Cass's experience, Cass is the main character, Cass Seltzer, it's the upper lip that reflects the true state of the soul, giving accurate tells on the self-regarding emotions. Self-doubt and self-satisfaction will both betray themselves there. And if there is an egotist lurking within, the upper lip is the place that will give them away. I think that's an extraordinary insight, and also, of course, funny in an important way. And that's another reason that I particularly like this book. It's a book that combines piety and playfulness, and the piety that actually is at the bottom of this book is the piety that is the piety of asking serious questions and frames faith, and I'm putting this on you so you can come back and argue with me by my intruding the word faith into this, but it has to do with the kind of questions one asks, and this book is about serious questions. I like it because it's a local book. It's a book that quite literally takes place in Cambridge. It opens 100 yards from here on the Weeks Bridge. It's a book about the culture of the academy, and in particular the culture of Harvard. It's very easy to identify from that perspective. I like it because it's a Jewish book. It's a Jewish book not only because many of the characters are Jewish, but it deals with problems and themes that are actually universal. And I don't think there's anything more Jewish than dealing with universal themes. And so I'm just going to end by pointing out an interesting quality of this book. It's called 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, a Work of Fiction. And of course, the play between those two is critical. At the end of the fiction, there's actually an appendix that has a very good, accurate summary with commentary of 36 arguments for the existence of God, and then a critique. And so I'm reading from the argument from Personal Purpose. I don't think I wanted this one. Sorry. Where's the cosmological argument one?
Oh, it's first one, number 1.
It's number 1?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Rebecca gives us in eight succinct points the cosmological argument, which many of us know. She then gives us critique 1, critique 2, tears it apart, and then there's a comment, and here's the comment. The cosmological argument, like the argument from the Big Bang and the argument from the intelligibility of the universe, is an expression of our cosmic befuddlement at the question, why is there something rather than nothing? The late philosopher Sidney Morgenbesser had a classic response to this question, and if there were nothing, you'd still be complaining? So lest you complain about the length of this introduction, let me turn this over to Rebecca Goldstein.
Thank you so much for that. Judaism is just such a a weird and wonderful religion, I have to say. You write an atheist novel and the rabbi introduces it, right? It's just, that somehow sums it all up. This is a novel about the latest installment in the long-running debate between religion and science, faith and reason. It's about a guy named Cass Seltzer, who's a psychologist of religion and who hits the big time when he publishes a book called The Varieties of Religious Illusion. He actually has a rather nuanced view of religion, but the nuances get lost because of that appendix that he attaches to the end, that I very conveniently attached to the end of my book, that gives these 36 arguments for the existence of God with rebuttals. I think those are far more arguments than have ever been assembled before, all the classic ones, but a lot that Cass thought up himself. And one of the reasons he attaches this to his book is that it's his contention that showing the fallacies in the arguments for the existence of God is not going to make a lot of difference in the life of believers. It's not going to make much difference in the felt qualities of religious experiences. And one of the nuances in Cass's view is that the religious impulse is so rooted in human nature that it erupts even in very secular settings. It's not just in religion that we find the complexities of the religious experience, but all over. In academia as well, in the sacred halls of the academy as well. And so, for example, there's Cass Seltzer's dissertation advisor back when he was a graduate student, and his mentor and tormentor, whose name is Jonas Elijah Clapper, and who is the extreme distinguished professor of faith, literature, and values. He's the only one in his department, which is very good because he can't get along with any of his colleagues. And he has some suspiciously messianic obsessions. There's an anthropologist named Roz Margolis, who is a former girlfriend of Cass's and who erupts into his contemporary life. And she's on a quest for immortality through biochemistry. And she is her Amazonian hunter-gatherers have christened her with a name that means in their language a whole lot of woman, and she is. And then there's a very small mathematical genius who is in fact the heart of the book. His name is Azariah, and he's the only son of the grand rabbi of his sect of Hasidic Judaism, and he's destined as the only son to be grand rabbi himself someday. And he sees the numbers and he thinks of them as, he knows they are angels. But most of all, there's Cass Seltzer. I'm going to read to you a brutally condensed version of the much longer first chapter. The first chapter is called The Argument from the Improbable Self. All of the chapters, and there are 36, have arguments, have titles like The Argument from Dappled Things or The Argument from Strange Laughter. Well, this one, and you can try to figure out why. This is called The Argument from the Improbable Self. Something shifted, something so immense you could call it the world. Call it the world. The world shifted, catching lots of smart people off guard, churning up issues you had thought had settled forever beneath the earth's crust. The more sophisticated you are, the more annotated your mental life, the more taken aback you're likely to feel, seeing what the world's lurch has brought to light, thrusting up beliefs and desires you had assumed belonged to an earlier stage of human development. What is this stuff, you ask one another, and how can it still be kicking around, given how much we already know? It looks like the kind of relics that archaeologists dig up and dust off, speculating about the beliefs that once had animated them to the best that they can be reconstructed. gone as they are now, those thrashings of proto-rationality and mythico-magical hypothesizing, and nearly forgotten. Now it's all gone unforgotten. And minds that have better things to think about have to divert precious neuronal resources to figuring out how to knock some sense back into the species. It's a tiresome proposition, having to take up the work of the Enlightenment all over again. But it's happened on your watch. You ought to have sent up a balloon now and then to get a read on the prevailing cognitive conditions, the thinks watching out for the think-nots. Now you've gone and let the stockpiling of fallacies reach dangerous levels, and the massed weapons of illogic are threatening the survivability of the globe. None of this is particularly good for the world, but it has been good for Cass Seltzer. That's what he's thinking at this moment, gazing down at the frozen river and regarding the improbable swerve his life has lately taken. He's thinking his life has gotten better because the world has gone bonkers. He's thinking zealots proliferate and Seltzer prospers. It's 4 a.m., and Cass Seltzer is standing on Weeks Bridge, the graceful arc that spans the Charles River near Harvard University, staring down at the river below, which is in the rigor mortis of late February in New England. The whole vista is deserted beyond vacancy, deserted in the way of being inhospitable to human life. There's not a car passing on Memorial Drive, and the elegant river dorms are darkened to silent hulks, the most hyperkinetic of undergraduates, sedated to purring girls and boys. It's not like Cass Seltzer to be out in the middle of an icy night, lost in thought while losing sensation in his extremities. Excitement had gotten the better of him. He had lain in his bed for hours, mind racing, until he gave up and crawled out from under the luxe comforter that his girlfriend, Lucinda Mandelbaum, had brought with her when she moved in with him at the end of June. This comforter has pockets for the hands and feet and a softness that's the result of impregnation with aloe vera. As a man, Cass had been skeptical, but he's become a begrudging believer in Lucinda's comforter, and in her Tempur-Pedic pillow, too, suffused with the fragrance of her coconut shampoo, making it all the more remarkable that he'd forsake his bed for this no-man's stretch of frigid night. Rummaging in the front closet for some extra protection, he had pulled out a long-forgotten item, the tricolor scarf that his ex-wife, Pascal, had learned to knit for him during the 4 months when she was recovering from aphasia. 4 months that had produced, among other shockers, an excessively long French flag of a wool scarf, which he wound 7.5 times around his neck before heading out into the dark to deal with the rush in his head. Lucinda's away tonight, away for the entire bleak week to come. Cass is missing Lucinda in his bones, missing her in the marrow that's presently crystallizing into ice. She's in warmer climes at a conference in Santa Barbara on non-Nash equilibria in zero-sum games. Among these equilibria is one that's called the Mandelbaum Equilibrium, and it's Cass's ambition to have the Mandelbaum Equilibrium mastered by the time he picks her up from the airport on Friday. Technically, Lucinda's a psychologist, like Cass, only not like Cass at all. Her work is so mathematical that almost no one would suspect it has anything to do with mental life. Cass, on the other hand, is about as far away on the continuum as you can get and still be in the same field. He's so far away that he's knee-deep in the swampy humanities. For close to 2 decades, Cass Seltzer has all but owned the psychology of religion, but only because nobody else wanted it. Not anyone with the smarts to do academic research in psychology and the ambition to follow through. It had been impossible to get grants, and the prestigious journals would return his manuscripts without sending them out for peer review. The undergraduates crowded his courses, but that counted, if anything, as a strike against him and his department. But now things had happened, fundamental and fundamentalist things, and religion as a phenomenon is on everybody's mind. And among all the changes that religion's new towering profile has wrought in the world, which are mostly alarming, if not downright terrifying, is the transformation in the life of one Cass Seltzer. First had come the book, which he had entitled The Varieties of Religious Illusion, a nod to both William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience and Sigmund Freud's The Future of an Illusion. This book had brought Cass an indecent amount of attention. Time magazine, in a cover story on the so-called New Atheists, had singled him out as the only one among them who seems to have any idea of what it feels like to be a believer. To, quote, write of religious illusions from the standpoint of the regretfully disillusioned, unquote, and had ended by dubbing him the atheist with a soul. I think that's very funny. When the magazine came out, Cass's literary agent, Cy Auerbach, called to congratulate him. Now that you're famous, he said, even I might have to take you seriously. Next had come the girl, although that designation hardly does justice to the situation, not when the situation stands for the likes of Lucinda Mandelbaum, known in her world as the goddess of game theory. Lucinda is pure and simple, a wondrous creature, with adoration her due and Cass's avocation. And now, only today, as if his cup weren't already gushing over, had come a letter from Harvard, laying out its intention of luring him away from Frankfurter University, located in nearby Wheaton, Massachusetts, about 12 miles upriver from where Cass is standing right now. After all that has happened to Cass over the course of this past year, he's surprised at the degree of awed elation he feels at the letter bearing the insignia of Veritas. But he's an academic, his sense of success and failure ultimately determined by the Academy's utilities, to use the language of Lucinda's science, and Harvard counts as the maximum utility. Cass has the letter on him right now, zippered into an inside pocket of his parka, insulating him against the cold. Pascal's absurd scarf mummying him up to his rimless glasses, he hadn't thought much about where he would go at this hour and had headed straight for Harvard Square, and then down to the river, and then up onto Weeks Bridge, dead center, which seems to be the spot that he'd been seeking. The night is so cold that everything seems to have been stripped bare of superfluous existence, reduced to the purity of abstraction. Cass has the distinct impression that he can see better in the sharpened air, that the cold is counteracting the nearsightedness that has had him wearing glasses since he was 12. He takes them off and of course can't see a thing, can barely see past the nimbus phantom of his own breath. But then he stares harder and it seems that he can see better, that the world has slid into sharper focus. It's only now with his glasses off that he catches sight of the spectacle that the extreme cold has created in the river below, frozen solid except where it's forced through the 3 arches of the bridge's substructure, creating an effect that could reasonably be called sublime, and in the Kantian sense. Not cozily beautiful, but touched by a metaphysical chill. The quickened water has sculpted 3 immense and perfect arches into the solid ice, soaring 50 or 60 feet to their apices, sublime, almost as if by design. Standing dead center on Weeks Bridge, in the dead of winter, in the dead of night, staring down at the sublime formation, Cass is contemplating the strange thing that his life has become. To him, his life has become strange to him. He feels as if he's wearing somebody else's coat, grabbed in a hurry from the bed in the spare bedroom after a boozy party. He's walking around in someone else's bespoke cashmere, while that guy's got Cass's hooded parka, and only Cass seems to have noticed the switch. What has happened is that Cass Seltzer has become an intellectual celebrity. He's become famous for his abstract ideas, and not just any old abstract ideas, but atheist abstract ideas, which makes him, according to some of the latest polls, a spokesperson for the most distrusted minority in America, the one that most Americans are least willing to allow their children to marry. This is a fact. Studies have found that a large proportion of Americans rate atheists below Muslims, recent immigrants, gays, Jews, and communists in, quote, sharing their vision of American society. Atheists, the researchers reported, seem to be playing the pariah role once assigned to Catholics, Jews, and communists, seen as harboring alien and subversive values, or more likely as having no inner values at all, and therefore likely to be criminals, rapists, and wild-eyed drug addicts. As if, as Cass often finds himself saying into microphones, the only reason to live morally is fear of getting caught and being spanked by the Heavenly Father. The atheist with a soul. Cass always smiles at the absurdity of the phrase. But which is the more absurd element? The truth is, and what's the good of a man contemplating an inhumanly frozen world at 4 a.m. if no truth-telling ensues? That Cass is somewhat at a loss to account for what he's done. How to explain those 36 arguments for the existence of God? See appendix. All of them formally constructed in the preferred analytic style, premises parading with military precision and every shirking presupposition and sketchy implication forced out into the open and subjected to rigorous inspection. Cass had started out with all the standard arguments for God's existence, the ones discussed in philosophy classes and textbooks. The cosmological argument number 1, the ontological argument number 2, the classical teleological argument number 3a, the arguments from miracles, moral truths, and mysticism, numbers 11, 16, and 22, respectively, Pascal's wager, number 31, and William James's argument from pragmatism, number 32. He had also analyzed the new batch of arguments recently whipped up by the intelligent design crowd, to wit, the argument from irreducible complexity, number 3b, the argument from the paucity of benign mutations, number 3c, the argument from the original replicator, number 3d, the argument from the Big Bang, number 4, the argument from the fine-tuning of the physical constants, number 5, and the argument from the hard problem of consciousness, number 12. But then he had gone beyond these too, attempting to polish up into genuine arguments those religious intuitions and emotions that are often powerfully evocative, but too sub-syllogistic to be regarded as actual arguments. He tried to capture under the net of analytic reason those fleeting shadows cast by unseen winged things darting through the thick foliage of the religious sensibility. So Cass had formulated the argument from cosmic coincidences, number 7, appealing to such facts as these, that the diameter of the moon as seen from the Earth is the same as the diameter of the sun as seen from the Earth, which is why we can have those spectacular eclipses when the corona of the sun is revealed in all its glory. He had formulated the argument from sublimity, number 34, trying to capture the line of reasoning lurking behind, for example, the recent testament of an evangelical scientist who had felt his religious doubts falling away from him when he was hiking in the mountains and came upon a frozen waterfall. In fact, a trinity of a frozen waterfall with 3 parts to it. For the right observer, Cass supposed, the sublime trinity of arches etched out in the Charles River below might yield a similar epiphany. And then there's the argument from the improbable self, number 13. Cass had struggled to squeeze precision into the sense of paradox that he knows too well, the flailing attempt to calm the inside-outside vertigo to which he's given, trying to construct something semi-coherent beneath that vertiginous step outside himself that would result from his staring too long at the improbable fact of his being identical with himself. If somebody hasn't experienced this particular kind of metaphysical seizure for himself, then it's hard to find the words to give a sense of what it's like. Cass had experienced it as a boy, lying in bed and thinking his way into the sense of the strangeness of being just this. Cass had the lower bunk bed. Both he and Jesse, his younger brother, had wanted the higher bunk, but as usual, Jesse had wanted what he wanted so much more than Cass had wanted it, with a fury of need that was exhausting just to watch, that Cass had let it go. Lying there awake on his lower bunk, Cass would think about being himself rather than being Jesse. There was Jesse, and here was Cass. But if someone were looking at the two of them, Jesse there, Cass here, how could that observer tell that he, Cass, was Cass here and not Jesse there? If it got switched on them, everything the same about them, the bodies and memories and sense of self and everything else, only now he was Jesse here, and there was Cass there. How would anybody know? How would he know? How would Jesse? Maybe a switch had already happened. Maybe it happened again and again. And how could anybody tell? The longer he tried to get a fix on the fact of being Cass here, the more the whole idea of it just got away from him. If he tried long enough to grasp it, then he could get the fact of being Cass here to blank out of existence and then come dribbling weakly back in like a fluorescent fixture flickering on and off toward death. He would get the sense of having been shot outside himself, and now as someone who was regarding his being Cass Seltzer as something like his being in the 6th grade, just something about him that happened to be true. Who was that other that he was, who was regarding his being Cass Seltzer as if he didn't have to be Cass Seltzer? The sense of giddiness induced in these exercises could be a bit too overwhelming for a kid in a lower bunk bed. It could be a bit overwhelming still. Here I am, Cass is saying, standing on Weeks Bridge and talking aloud into the sublimely indifferent night. Cass knows he needs to tamp down his tendencies toward the transcendent. It isn't becoming in America's favorite atheist, who is at this moment Cass Seltzer, who is somehow or other just this here. Here I am. How can it be that of all things one is this thing, so that one can say astonishingly, in the right frame of mind, it is astonishing, with the metaphysical chill blowing in from afar, here I am? When you didn't force yourself to think in formal reconstructions, when you didn't catch these moments of ravishments under the lens of premises and conclusions, when you didn't impale them and label them like so many splayed butterflies bleeding the transcendental glow right out of them, then what? It's even hard at a time like this to resist the shameful, narcissistic appeal of reasonings like the argument from personal coincidences, number 8, and the argument from answered prayers, number 9, and the argument from a wonderful life, number 10. William James had rebuked the scoundrel logic that calculates divine providence from one's own little goodie bag of gains, and Cass couldn't agree more with the spirit of James. But here it is, his bulging goodie bag, and call him a scoundrel for feeling personally grateful to the universe, when at this same moment that he's standing on Weeks Bridge and tossing hosannas out into the infinite universe, there are multitudes of others whose lives are painfully constricting with misfortunes that are just as arbitrary and undeserved as his own expansive good luck. But Cass Seltzer does feel grateful. At moments like this, could Cass altogether withstand the sense that, hard to put it into words, the sense that the universe is personal, that there's something personal that grounds existence in order and value and purpose and meaning, and that the grandeur of this personal universe has somehow infiltrated and is expanding his own small person, bringing his littleness more into line with its grandeur, that the personal universe has been personally kind to him, gracious and forgiving to Cass Seltzer, gratuitously, exorbitantly. divinely kind, and this despite Cass's having with callowness and shallowness of forethought thrown spitballs at the whole idea of cosmic intentionality? No, that doesn't capture it either. Those words are far too narrowed by Cass's own particular life. What it is he could feel, has felt, might even be feeling now, has nothing to do with the contents of Cass's existence, but rather with existence itself. This what? This expansion out into the world, which is a kind of love, he supposes, a love for the whole of existence that could so easily well up in Cass Seltzer at this moment, standing here in the pure abstractions of this night and contemplating the strange thisness of his life when viewed sub specia eternitatis, that is to say, from the vantage point of eternity, which comes so highly recommended to us by Spinoza. Here it is then, the sense that existence is just such a tremendous thing. One comes into it astonishingly. Here one is, formed by biology and history, genes and culture. In the midst of the contingency of the world, here one is. One doesn't know how, one doesn't know why, and suddenly one doesn't know where one is either, or who or what one is either. And all that one knows is that one is a part of it, a considered and conscious part of it, generated and sustained in existence in ways one can hardly comprehend, all the time conscious of it, though, of existence, the fullness of it, the reaching expanse and pulsing intricacy of it. And one wants to live in a way that at least begins to do justice to it. One wants to expand one's reach of it as far as expansion is possible, and even beyond that, to live one's life in a way commensurate with the privilege of being a part of and conscious of the whole reeling, glorious, infinite sweep, a sweep that includes so improbably a psychologist of religion named Cass Seltzer, who, moved by powers beyond himself, did something more improbable than all the improbabilities constituting his improbable existence could have entailed, did something that won him someone else's life, a better life, a more brilliant life, a life beyond all the ones he had wished for, in the pounding obscurity of all his yearnings, because all of this couldn't belong to him, to the man who stands on Week's Bridge, wrapped around in a scarf his once beloved ex-wife Pascal had knit for him for some necessary reason that he would never know, perhaps to offer him some protection against the desolation she knew would soon be his, and was, but is no longer, suspended here above sublimity, his cheeks aflame with either euphoria or frostbite, a letter in his zippered pocket with the imprimatur of Veritas, and a Lucinda Mandelbaum with whom to share it all. Thank you. If you read the appendix, you'll see, in fact, that there are more than 36 arguments. I had to group them because I had to be 36. So there are many teleological arguments. There's the classical teleological arguments, but then there's all these spin-offs, and I had to do some fancy numbering because, of course, it had to be 36. There's a lot of religious symbolism throughout this. And not only did I know that there were the 36, the Lamed Vovniks, for the sake of whom God does not destroy the world. But as a little girl, well into my adolescence, I was convinced my father was one of them. So, yes, double chai as well, yes. Of course, in Hebrew, letters are represented by, numbers are represented by the letters. And so the letter, the way you represent 18, chet yud, is also the word for life, and which is, of course, of the greatest value in Judaism, and so the sanctity of life. And so 18 is a very, very special number, and twice 18 is 36. So Gödel believed that the ontological argument, which is number 2 in my appendix, could be worked up so that it could avoid what seems to be its fatal flaw pointed out by Immanuel Kant. It's all in the appendix. And in particular, there's number 35 of my, actually number 36 is the argument from the abundance of arguments. There are just so many arguments. But number 35 is my favorite argument, and that's the argument for Spinoza's God. The problem with that argument is if it's a valid argument, it falsifies all the other arguments. But there is a way in which that argument takes into account Gödel's new ontological argument. So, yes. Yes, when Sir Isaac Newton had said that Sir Isaac Newton was a very religious man, as many scientists have been very religious, and said that God's continual input into creation keeps the world going. And, you know, one could say that science has developed a good way since Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton lived in the 17th century and had much to do with the foundations, laying down the foundations of science. The laws of nature in and of themselves don't explain why there's something rather than nothing. So it's certainly possible. But I would say, here's Cass's argument, and it's not just science itself. Here's how Cass's argument goes, and it's a three-pronged argument, and I pretty much agree with him. It's that first you look at the arguments for God's existence and see if any of them are valid. After all, in the absence of good reasons to believe in the existence of something, then, usually we don't believe in something. We believe in that thing. It's known as Occam's razor. You need good grounds in order to believe that something exists. So you look at the arguments and you see if they really hold up. He thinks they don't. He tries to go through each one and point out what the fallacy is. That doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. It just means that we haven't proved God's existence. Even that doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. Next step in his argument is that the biological sciences, and in particular psychology, has gone through a very great expanse in its reach in recent decades, and has begun to be able to offer us reasons for why we might be highly inclined to believe in the existence of God, even if there's no evidence forthcoming. So his arguments, he's a psychologist of religion, and he's particularly influenced by evolutionary psychology, but he feels that branch in science, not physics, but the new behavioral sciences, are offering us ways of explaining our great tendency to believe. And Cass thinks this tendency is so strong and so multifaceted, it comes from so many different directions, that, as I said, it's not only confined to religion. And third, and for Cass Seltzer, this is the third prong and the most important aspect of the argument, and it could stand on its own. It doesn't even need the other two aspects of it, is the nature of the world that we observe around us. And he argues this very strongly. He has a debate with a theist at Memorial Church. There's a showdown in Memorial Church, and the two of them debate. And for Seltzer, the torturous logic, the mental gymnastics known as theodicy, that you have to go through in order to reconcile the nature of this world with all of its suffering, the excessive suffering of innocence. And we don't need any more demonstration of this. It's all very vivid before our minds right now. The nature of that world, to try to reconcile it with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the three great monotheistic religions, is just to him it's too hard. And so those three prongs together, the arguments don't work. We have a way of explaining, nevertheless, why we have such a tendency to believe, and three, the empirical nature of the world with all its suffering. That's why he's an atheist. It's not on the basis of the laws of nature. The laws of nature don't explain themselves. That's a very long answer. I'm sorry. Yes. Well, actually, your wicked question can be answered. I have a blurb from Christopher Hitchens, who, one of those rare things. They don't exist very often. He doesn't give out blurbs very often. Richard Dawkins has read the book and is going to use it in his next debate. The appendix is very handy when you're... and... Yeah, and Dan Dennett, they've all read it and they like it. But interestingly enough, the Templeton Foundation, had organized, and they're interested in reconciling religion and science, or in the big questions, as they put it now. And they had organized a dinner around the book, a dinner salon, and had invited, a bunch of New York thinkers, columnists, heavy-duty dudes, and they some were believers and some not, and it was really interesting to me, and I tried to keep quiet because what was interesting was that those who were religious saw this as an affirmation of the religious impulse, and Cass's spiritual experience, and he clearly has spiritual experiences, but even other things, they found an affirmation of religiosity, and the atheists, certainly not, Dawkins Christopher would not have liked my book. So this is the wonderful thing about fiction, because everybody brings their own experience to it, and it's, and reads it with a different orientation. I mean, that's why I turned to fiction, away from philosophy. I'm trained in philosophy. I sometimes write philosophy. But fiction is this way of being able to get into these different orientations toward reality that go so very deep, that there's almost as if you're talking past each other. And I wanted to get at that here. But it is from a... Cass is Jewish, and Azaria, this boy who really demonstrates in many ways that religion is about far more than the belief in God. And maybe you feel this more when you're Jewish than Christian, I don't know, but that the arguments for God's existence are pretty much beside the point when you're Jewish, and this little boy really demonstrates this. But I think that is universally true. Yeah, I mean, I took issue with one review, in particular. Reviews have been quite nice, but one, who sort of said, isn't this odd that it's from a Jewish point of view? And I was like, isn't it odd that when Dostoevsky wrote about the controversy between religion and science, he wrote about the Orthodox Church? I mean, isn't that odd? No, that's the thing about writing a novel. You don't write about religion in general. How does a novelist portray that? There's no such thing as religion in general. There is particular religions. And I actually think that Judaism, which started this whole thing, monotheism, is not an arbitrary choice. Even it's also the one that I know most intimately, but it's not arbitrary either. Is there? I don't know. But there are psychologists of religion, and especially people who are trying to put forth evolutionary psychological explanations and how certain aspects of these beliefs had survival values, or are continuations, are extensions of beliefs that had survival value. So, just for example, are hypothesizing about causes, which is, the origin of science and everything, really, is has great survival value. And religion, part of religion, is an extension of that kind of reasoning, trying to extend causal reasoning beyond. There's also have been very interesting things written. I know Paul Bloom, evolutionary psychologist, has written on the evolutionarily supported tendency for us to believe in dualism, that we are not just bodies, but that we're bodies and souls. And this sense emerges very early on in children. I actually remember when my oldest daughter was a little kid, and she was like me, she talked with her hands, right? She was always, and so we were sitting at the dinner table, and there was always something was being spilled because she was always talking. And she, knocked over a glass of something or other, and then she said, "Look at what my body did." And I said, "You didn't do it?" She said, "No, I didn't do it. My body did it." And but by which she meant, it wasn't intentional. She didn't mean to do this thing, but I pursued it with her more as she was about 2.5, and sure enough, she was a dualist. She was and so these things emerge, and there are psychologists who are explaining these sorts of things that you find there. You find it in religion all together, supported by psychology. Yeah, I don't know if Harvard has one, but they do have evolutionary psychologists. Yeah, I mean, it's not middle ground in the sense that he's wishy-washy about the existence of God. Yes, he's not an agnostic, but he is, one of the things that I was interested in doing in this book is to present godless spiritual experience, that the notion that if you don't believe in God, that you're not capable of this expansive, world-affirming, ecstatic, transcendent experience is a terrible belittlement of the godless, I think. And so it was very important for me to show him that way. I don't know that it's a position. It just is a truth. It's a truth. We have this capacity, psychological, God knows why, for being able, to get outside of ourselves in this, ecstatic way. That's what the word ecstasy means, to stand beside. To stand beside what? Yourself. And it's from the Greek, they had it big time. We have it all, math can do it, science can do it, art can do it, music can do it. And it often finds, it's very natural for it to take religious expression. But the experience itself need not be a religious one. It can be a religious one, and that's the language that comes most naturally. But Cass resists that language. His intellectual integrity leads him to resist the religious language, but the experience, I think is universal. I think, everybody who's been touched by things, greater than themselves and has felt that expansion out into the world, what Spinoza, the godless Spinoza, called intellectual love of God. There too, the language that comes most naturally is God language, but it's not intrinsically a religious experience. It can be, but it needn't be. So if that's a middle ground, I think it's just being true to psychology, to human psychology. I'm a Spinozist. Yeah, when Einstein was asked, he was saying some things that were making people a little nervous about whether he believed in God, and he got a telegram from a rabbi who happened to be named Goldstein. Rabbi Goldstein sent him a telegram saying, "Do you believe in God?" And Einstein, very cannily, wrote back, "I believe in Spinoza's God." And, it's like, okay, you're not an atheist, but in fact, Spinoza's God is, it's not a transcendent God. It's the world itself. It's what I show Cass reveling in at various times. He's always slipping off into this, even when he's in Memorial Church and he's supposed to be keeping his mind on debating this formidable theist opponent. He starts slipping away into ecstasy, has to call himself back, So he's very given to that sort of thing, as am I. So, yes. Anyway, thank you, and I would be very happy to sign books.